Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Neera Tanden with us today. We'll chat with Neera in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Neera Tanden is the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress and the CEO of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Before leading American Progress, Tanden was the domestic policy advisor to President Joe Biden and director of the Domestic Policy Council, overseeing some of the administration's signature achievements, including its efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs and expand health insurance coverage. Previously, she was senior advisor and staff secretary in the White House, and she has also served as senior advisor for health reform at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, policy director for Hillary Clinton's first presidential campaign, legislative director in then-Senator Clinton's office, and a senior policy advisor to the First Lady in President Bill Clinton's White House. Neera, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with you talking about the Center for American Progress. Tell us about the organization, its mission, and perhaps an example or two of the important work that it's currently doing.
Thanks so much for that question. I'd love to actually talk about what CAP is doing. So the Center for American Progress is an action-oriented think tank. So we have existed for over 20 years. There's 240 of us. We are very much focused on providing the best arguments against what the administration is doing, and also the best policy ideas of how we move our country forward. And we think about both of those actions as, how we make progress for the country. How do we reduce as many harms as possible? How do we actually make people's lives better? Our overarching mission is to improve the lives of Americans from every corner of the country. It's to create ideas that make people's lives better. I always say that change happens from ideas meeting social movements. And so we're kind of part of the ideas aspect of that. So, of course, today we are fighting a lot of terrible things. Just an example of the kind of work we've done is we organized the war room against reconciliation. We had two goals. One is to make the bill very unpopular, make it public what the legislation would do to people, and defeat the legislation. We did really well in the first, little less well in the second. Usually you make a bill unpopular, it has some impact on how people vote. That's not how we live today. But, it's now our responsibility to ensure there's accountability for the vote as well.
Mm-hmm. And so with democracy under attack, and Donald Trump's authoritarian rhetoric and actions rising the way they have, how do we protect our democratic institutions?
Well, first and foremost, if you look at history, if you look at authoritarian regimes around the world, if you look at what happened in Hungary, the thing that the authoritarians want the most is a scared or sleepy public. I think one of the big differences between now and 8 years ago is that the administration is using the power of the federal government to intimidate, perhaps terrorize institutions that it sees as oppositional, as well as, of course, the actions that it's taking for undocumented people who've, migrants who've been here for 10, 12, 20 years. But really, it's using fear as its, asymmetric weapon. It's basically trying to silence an opposition, intimidate people, because they know that it's a collective response that's the most problematic for them. And I think this is why it's really crucial that people protest, that they engage, that they call their members of Congress. It's really vital that we demonstrate to the country that he's in the minority, that he's unpopular, that his policies are unpopular, that there is a growing movement of opposition. That is really the only way to stop Republicans from just going along in every single way. And it is actually the best way for us to mobilize an opposition into the next year. Now, I know I hear from people all the time who are like, polls don't matter. And I am not arguing to people that Donald Trump himself is intimidated by polls. I think he is totally focused on power. But our focus is ensuring that other Republicans see that they are making a choice between their primary election and their general election and how they do this. It's not just one choice. It's not just winning their primary. It's that they will lose office maybe just a little later in the general election if they keep going along hook, line, and sinker with this president who is destroying the social fabric of our country.
I would say that I think Trump does care a lot about polls, except he sees them as ratings, not polls.
Yes.
That's how he views everything. How should Democrats be responding to the rise of far-right media ecosystems and the disinformation that shapes so much of today's political discourse?
Well, number one, I think we need to fearlessly advocate for our views everywhere. I think one of the things that happened in the last 4 years is you saw conservative voices using every outlet possible to just argue their positions. I think in the world we live in today, if you do not contest a lie, people will believe it. And it's kind of human nature, right? Like someone says something like lies about you, people expect you to say it's a lie. And if you don't say it's a lie, then they think, well, maybe there's a little truth to that. And I think there's a lot of that in the entire ecosystem. It's if they say, we have terrible policies and we're just out to get white men, we have to actually argue our policies and say, no, we're not actually trying to just get white men. We're not just trying to limit white men's aspirations. You actually have to contest the arguments where they are. And I do think a real challenge over the last 4 years and longer really is Democrats can often think whoa, we should just talk to one group of people, and if we just talk to the mainstream media, we will get our voices out, and that's really wrong. And one of the reasons why I'm so happy you're doing exactly what you're doing is that you're meeting people where they are. And it's not up to political leaders to get to voters where the political leaders want to talk to voters. It's important for political leaders to get to voters where they are. And good political leaders understood that, whether it was Abraham Lincoln going to town squares and doing debates with Lincoln Douglas, or in today's ecosystem, going on a podcast or talking on talk radio or using your WhatsApp to talk to hundreds of thousands of people. People have to just experiment with different means of communication.
Right. So we've had 10 years experience with MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
What insights might you have gained over that period from the success of this movement that you think the left must reckon with if it wants to win back the working class, young men, and other very important constituencies that it's lost?
I have been struggling with this question of what has given rise to the MAGA movement? Why we've gone close to 250 years as a country. We have seen civil wars, Great Depressions, dramatic transformations from technology. And we haven't really seen a political movement or leader like this. And I think, one thing that I'm really thinking through, and I don't have the answer to this, but I do think if you think about what distinguishes this period from the last 10 years from previous eras, is I see really two trends. One, the rise of social media, which if we want to be honest, attracts people's eyeballs and is really hyper-focused on keeping eyeballs and attention. And that is really a function often of driving hate instead of love, which is a kind of natural condition for polarization. And it's, again, not just our country that's seeing mass polarization. It's, European countries, other countries around the world are seeing polarization. So I think that's a big meta issue. But I also think we have to turn inward and ask ourselves why this is happening. And one thing that is really different over the last 10 years is that, and it's a little bit longer, but people's sense of how their kids will do relative to themselves has really changed. Today, 3/4 of Americans believe that their children will be worse off than they are. And I think that speaks to a lack of upward mobility and social mobility and a sense of optimism about the future. And the truth is, when people are less hopeful, when they are hopeless, it is easier to create, people to blame, right? So we are confronting a movement that takes a real problem, right? Cost of living is too high. And they provide an answer to that, which is migrants are raising the cost. There's so many migrants are raising the cost of housing. Now, you and I could dispute that, right? But they are providing an answer to people. And I think we actually have to do some deep analysis of how, and I think this is also a function of the Center for American Progress. What is our vision and our policy program about how we're going to improve people's lives and ensure that there is upward mobility, that, like the system isn't rigged against you, that people have a fair shot. Like you aren't well connected. You're not wealthy, you're not well connected, and you can still have upward mobility in the country. Like I grew up the daughter of immigrants, and my father left when I was 5, and my mother was on welfare. And, like I live in a country that I grew up on food stamps and and my mom literally got welfare benefits, and then she got a job, and I eventually went to a pretty good law school, and I am actually where I am today. And like I basically believe in this hokey thing called the American dream, but I don't think we provide enough of that vision. And like in a world where younger men's job prospects, their college attendance, their upward mobility is declining, it's not wrong. It's not like crazy for them to become angrier at the political system if it's not actually providing a sense or a path of upward mobility for them or a better life for them. And so I think like what we really have to do is compete on ideas. Like what are our ideas to make sure your life is better? And they can be like, I think they should span the spectrum here. We have to find those solutions wherever they are. How do we aggressively work to make your life better? And I feel like we've lost a little bit over the last 4 years, and it's really our job, on the broad center left to offer those ideas. And that's the work we're doing to offer that, kind of compelling alternative vision, because we do have to have a choice for people. We can't just say Trump is wrong. We have to say we have a better vision.
Yeah, I agree with so much of that, but I also think that this phenomenon we've seen in the last 10 years is deeply rooted in racism. It's deeply rooted in sexism. I mean, we had 2 of the most qualified women, one a woman of color.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, lose to a dude who was a convicted felon. So what does that tell you about America? But, we've always had sexism and racism in this country. But I think the difference for me is that 10 years ago, he looked at his crowd and said, you guys could take the hoods off now. You don't have to hide, you don't have to hide. You don't have to be ashamed, afraid. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm in the White House. I will protect you. I mean, he literally kind of said that in those words.
Yeah. He definitely normalized hate. Like I don't take away from the normalizing of hate. And look, I think there are deep strands of racism and sexism in the country. And, people always ask me about, our future leaders. And I have to just step back and say, we had a woman run for president in 2016, and everyone was like, she doesn't smile enough. And then we had a woman run in 2024, and everyone was like, she's smiling too much. And I think at some point you just have to ask yourself, like, what is it in the country that this is the standard by which we are judging against, like, obvious, like I shouldn't say obviously, but at least obvious to me, a kind of demagogic lunatic. And so I do think there are deep strands there that we have to analyze, but I also think, there is something going on in the culture and in the country that people are reaching to, these kind of terrible answers where we turn against each other in like deep fundamental ways. And I have to say, like, just think about this. I mean, this country did go through a Great Depression, and we didn't, look, there's spouts of ugliness. I don't want to take away from that, but there was fascism in Europe, and in our country, we basically rejected that because we had a president who was offering, again, a new deal for the country. And I think we have to think about, how we were competing on that level and always stand against the hatred, misogyny, sexism, and racism that is at the baseline of what we were seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said before we've never had a president like Donald Trump. Given what you just said, what always terrifies me is that look how close we are coming to autocracy, to fascism, with the greatest economy we've had in decades and a record stock market. Imagine if this was the 70s and we had like 15% interest rates. Imagine if there was 20% unemployment and Donald Trump was in the White House.
Yeah.
A democracy would be dead. Everybody talks about like what is going to save us from dictatorship. Is it Congress? Is it the Supreme Court? No, it's the economy. Jay Powell, he is the savior. He's the freaking savior. So as long as that economy stays strong, this dance that he's doing, it's terrifying in many ways, and he's testing the limits of democracy in ways the founding fathers never could comprehend. But it keeps that fence up.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. But I also think this does go to like, why are people so angry at each other? Right? Why are people so willing to blame, to point to some group or other? Why does Trump have that power in a time where, like people's lived material conditions are not what they were 50, 60, 70 years ago? And I think he has been a master at these, like bringing out the kind of inner demons that people have and their psychologies about, the doubts they have about certain groups, the biases they have about certain groups. I totally take all of that. But I think, we also have to struggle with just to say honestly, I feel like we could be in a debt spiral where like our fear over the next 4 years beats their fear. And there's a lot to fear, and our side is very fearful and very angry. But I think ultimately to try to get out of this downward spiral, we have to think of a language of hope and like real hope, not like bullshit hope, not like we just say hopeful things, but what's our kind of actual plan for this country so that it is a country where, you can grow up poor and become like successful and wealthy. I mean, one of the kind of things that really sticks out to me is today, 7.5% of people who are born in the bottom 20% make it to the top 20%, right? Mm-hmm. It's twice that in Canada and Europe. Just think about that. There's greater upward economic mobility in Europe and Canada than in the United States. Like, we used to be a place where we were the upward mobility machines of the world. Like, you could come here and have nothing and discover something great and like, I do think when people are anxious about the system being rigged, the political system being rigged, the economy being rigged, what they may be telling us is that upward mobility machine is broken. So, like in previous eras, we've had like leaders who can develop like a agenda of hope, right? So, and that's real and concrete. It's a real program, but also does give people, like, leaders can provide a pathway for it. And I just think we're like, this is ruminations for us. We haven't developed the whole agenda, but I think that the best way for us to combat this darkness is to provide some sense of optimism and hope for a future that's not words, but a real like plan of action.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And it really makes me think that what used to be American exceptionalism, right, that we all strived for, we're now, the phrase is now American awfulness. That's because we have a president who never intended to bring anything to the American people to truly make America great again. He's just self-serving in every conceivable way, and he's corrupt. He's a grifter, and so it's a mob. It's not an administration. It's a mob. And from that mob mentality just comes really bad, unhopeful things. But this is a good segue to discuss the elephant in the room, the Epstein situation, because that in many ways is giving people a lot of hope. Because like most fevers, MAGA will one day break. There's really only two successful cults in this world. It's Scientology and the Unification Church. Both were founded and run by people way, way, way smarter than Trump.
Yeah.
And in it for the long game. But everything else, every cult dies. And a lot of people are looking at this Epstein situation as maybe the fever, however slowly it may take, maybe the fever is starting to break. So we've had some major, this afternoon has been dizzying. We've had some major breaking news. Wall Street Journal, literally before we started talking, we're doing this Wednesday afternoon. Wall Street Journal reported that they told the Justice Department back in May that Trump's name is among many in the Epstein files, and he's listed in it multiple times. Also, a federal judge in Florida this afternoon denied the administration's request to unseal grand jury transcripts. There's two requests. One is Florida, one is New York, as you know. The New York thing is not impacted by this. That's going to be a separate ruling shortly. And there's the House Oversight Committee has issued a subpoena for Epstein's girlfriend and partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell. Wow. This is just one afternoon, right? One afternoon. Right. So what's your take on this whole situation? It is not going away as Trump would like, is it?
No, my take on this situation has been my take for 2 weeks, which is just as soon as the Don Bongino information went public, where it was like he's fighting out and he might quit his job. I think that the most obvious thing here is becoming the most obvious thing here, which is the Trump administration's Department of Justice decided to the Epstein files because the Epstein files have Donald Trump all over them. Like, it's not a complicated conspiracy. Donald Trump's Department of Justice is protecting Donald Trump. Like, I think it is so odd, honestly, that like Kash Patel goes on a podcast a month ago and is like, why would I not be putting forward the information? Of course, I was like, I have an answer for you because you're protecting your boss. Do we really think that Donald Trump would be like, yeah, just put out the information, even though I'm all over it? What is, just your nature of conspiracy theories. Like, I think what is fascinating about this entire conspiracy theory is the giant elephant in the room that has always been there, right? And I actually think there is this weird thing psychologically that has happened, which is there are pictures of Donald Trump with Epstein all over the place, right? So Epstein commits suicide, noting that there are now 3 minutes, not just 1 minute, according to Wired, 3 minutes we discover that are gone, that he commits suicide. Donald Trump is president when he commits suicide. He blames everyone. And everyone else, even though he has been friends with Jeffrey Epstein, like, women have identified him in the past with Jeffrey Epstein as part of their abuse, right? And I actually think it was like a weird psychological need of MAGA people to say, no, it's not him. It's all this other elite. And then he fed into it, and all of his minions fed into it by saying, no, yes, if we take power, we will be the people who expose that global elite that has victimized these young girls. And this was like kind of a weird devil's bargain that he had to play in, because otherwise, if people spent 5 minutes thinking about Epstein, if he didn't give them like this alternative conspiracy theory, they would have looked at him. Right? That is like the thing that's so weird about it. What I found so odd about this whole conversation is like, there is a pretty public person that we've seen there's lots of accusations about a lot of people. Like, of course, even Democrats like Bill Clinton. But there's pictures all over the internet with one guy where, I mean, there's a video in Mar-a-Lago where they're like sort of dancing together, and Donald Trump is like looking over at Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, have you ever seen him look over at someone with such collegiality and friendship?
It's
It's
also
just
creepy.
weird, right? He looks down on people. Everything is like pecking order. He's always kind of looking down. This is a guy who's like his genuine friend who is a sex trafficker. Okay. So this is what's so fascinating about this whole debate. And that's why I think fundamentally a bunch of my friends have texted me. And it's like, why is this holding him up so much? And I was like, because genuinely, I think it is a problem when they see his name in this file, because it's going to be kids who were sex trafficked. And, they are going to wake up and see the emperor finally, the emperor has no clothes. And he is genuinely worried about that. And, he's done, the amazing thing about the moment we're in is he has literally used every trick he's ever used before. He's like, Hillary's emails, Barack Obama Russiagate, like name a figure that he could go after. And like, absolutely not working. Absolutely not working. And I think it is because there has been this kind of devil's bargain about this really basic problem that he himself always has had, which is no one has been publicly identified closer to Jeffrey Epstein than this guy.
Yeah, I think he's thrown more Hail Marys in the last 2 weeks than Aaron Rodgers has in his entire career. But, here's the thing we know about Trump. When he opens his mouth, it's either projection or confession, right? And, you mentioned the Obama
100%.
thing. Okay, so now Obama was stealing the election. Okay. So that of course means that Trump stole the election.
Yeah.
It's a Democrat hoax, this Epstein thing. Well, that of course means it's his hoax. So the question is there going to be that point? I mean, look, even in The Wizard of Oz, the most worshipped man in Emerald City was eventually outed as a fraud. It's just he wasn't so great and powerful. He's just this dude behind the
It's just a man.
Just a man behind a curtain, desperately trying to prop himself up. And I really do believe, I just interviewed this guy, Rich Logis. He started an organization called Leaving MAGA. He was in MAGA for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And very bright guy, and we'll be posting it tomorrow. But he explains how and why he got into the movement, what it was like inside, how he got out. But he really helped me understand, because I had so many questions for him that I've had for years. Like, what makes these people tick? And specifically, what is it about this conspiracy? Of all the conspiracies, the birth certificate, the Biden crime family, of all the things that he's thrown at them that has turned out to be nothing but absolute gaslighted bullshit, why is this the one? And he said what you just said a minute ago, and that is, this is about kids. It's about kids. And what they believe is this brutal abuse and violation of children in the most heinous way. And that's why they won't let go of it, because starting with QAnon 10 or more years ago, and fueled by QAnon and MAGA throughout the last 10 years, and reinforced over and over and over and over again by Trump and Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and all these guys, they created this beast. They fed this beast, and now this beast is devouring them. And it's literally like a boulder rolling down a hill. And it really does appear that they're not outrunning it.
Yeah, no. I think it's so interesting, right? Because, in 2016, when he first ran, Trump ran these ads, and they were all Steve Bannon ads of this, global elite that is controlling your life. And, that's why everything is terrible for you. And I do think it is this it's just a really important narrative, right? That there's a powerful group of very wealthy men who are victimizing, often working class, unconnected, politically unconnected, like girls, and trafficking those girls. And again, the whole thing has been a weird mystery to me, because it was like, 1 + 1 = 2 here. Like, there's Donald Trump hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
He says nice things about Ghislaine Maxwell. He's very sympathetic to her. Like, what's going on here? And I think fundamentally the break, and it might be, again, I'm not saying it'll break all of MAGA, but if he loses 5% of this
Absolutely. That's the key
intense
right there.
base, that is just devastating for the entire Republican Party. If they say, if like honestly, just like the blinders come off and they recognize that again, he's part of this big thing that is so disgusting and terrible, then I think that has profound political implications for the whole country and the whole, like, really, how all of our politics could move forward. And that is why we are in a world where, again, I've lived through a lot in my life, but I've never seen the House Republicans drop this business for a week in order to get him out of town to avoid a vote on like a scandal. I just haven't seen that in either party thus far. So,
I don't
this
know where
is
they
profound.
think, I don't know where they think they're running to. Like, there's an electorate that's waiting for them at home. A lot of MAGA people who want answers.
Yeah, I have a theory about this, right? Which is what they're trying to avoid is not like a conversation about this. They're worried about a vote on it. And just think about it. Like, look at all the news that's breaking. They take a vote against a discharge petition, then they have voted to be part of like the cover up. Then facts come out afterwards about Trump's role. I just think they are scared. I think fundamentally they're scared of him being on the list.
Right. But pulling down the closed sign and running out the back door, that doesn't make them look any better.
No, I think it makes them collectively look worse. But that's the thing that they're doing, right? They're choosing between looking like they're covering up or voting against it. Voting is part of
it's a no-win.
It's a terrible, and one is Mike Johnson decided, and the other is they individually decide. So, but it tells you like how bad everything is, honestly.
Well, I think Nancy Mace today said she's going to vote, when she can, she's going to vote for the release of the files. And there's 11, 12 other Republicans.
Which tells you the power of MAGA on this, right? I think this whole thing that MAGA doesn't care. They turned the page with the Wall Street Journal. It's all BS. Like, if they turn the page, why is any of this happening?
They care because they know what they were told. They know who told it to them. And they really know what they want. I mean, I've raised 3 kids. I have 3 young grandchildren. You know that moment where
you look great. You look great.
I started young. In that moment when the kid comes to you and says, "I want a grape box juice," and you go like, "We're out of grape. How about fruit punch?" And they're like, "I want grape." Like, "We don't have it. How about watermelon?" "I want grape." Like, that's MAGA right now. They want grape. They don't want anything else that Trump is feeding them. They want grape.
And
they're not going to give up till they get it.
They want the truth. Like, like, again, and also just like, I just think that the humor of all of this, right, is like let's just step back. It's Donald Trump's personal criminal attorney is the deputy AG. That would be weird in any normal place. It's his personal criminal attorney who puts out the memo that he's going to go interview.
Right.
Swell. Right. I see this and I'm basically like, so you're admitting that you wrote a memo saying the whole thing was closed without actually talking to Maxwell, which just goes to show, how stupid they think everybody is. That's the thing. They're not like, this is the thing. Like, you're clearly in cover-up mode if you're not like even just thinking how ridiculous this sounds that you did this memo. Clearly the memo was a cover-up if you didn't think, oh, maybe I should go talk to Ghislaine Maxwell about actually what happened here, right? And so that's just what I think, hats off to the people who recognize that this has all been kind of BS.
Yeah, we might be breaking some news here, but they're not a bright cabal. Right?
Well,
not the brightest bulbs in the shed, as the malapropism kings and
Yeah.
queens often like to say. So let's shift gears and talk about what's happening in New York City, because I think this not only is a city issue
Mhm.
at a macro level, it could be indicative of something nationwide. So we have this young 33-year-old,
Mhm.
relatively inexperienced Muslim Democratic Socialist. We all know what he did in the primary. It's a very, very
Mhm.
good chance he will become the next mayor of this city. Um, it's just interesting when you observe how politically in this country the pendulum has swung so far to the right, and it's interesting to see whether or not it's actually now swinging very far to the left. And is that, not in a pejorative way, is that the way that Democrats right now are very wisely speaking to the issues like affordability that are germane to young people, young men, the working class, as we were speaking about before? And is it really the only way right now to counter Trumpism? Because, like, those in the middle, the centrists, that's just a flailing group right now. There's no home for them right now. Maybe that's the answer right now, that we do have to become way more progressive in this country, because that's echoing what is important to most of the country right now.
Yeah. So I think this is like a really central debate going forward. And I guess I kind of think about this in a different way, which is first, I think Mamdani has done a service to the country because he has laid bare how, and many of us knew this, but I think politics people need to learn lessons. And he's demonstrated that the issues around cost of living are as important today as they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I think he really does go to this issue that I raised before, which is people want a solution. And any solution will beat no solution. And like, even if you don't like the solution, having one is better than not having one. Right. And that was really clear. Like, he's a very skillful politician. He's really thought through how to communicate in ways that people haven't. I think he's really understood social media, and that what people crave in a world of political cynicism is just honest candor about how you're going to tackle problems. And really, honestly, he did actually talk about these things in very non-ideological terms. Like, a moderate could have talked about the price of sandwiches being too high because because the New York City government is too inefficient to hand out permits, and people have to pay $20,000 for a permit, which jacks up the price of food. Like, that's not a left or a right thing. That's just like kind of a common sense thing. But I think the thing that I like, the way I'm thinking about this, and I think we're trying to approach this, is the lessons from authoritarian countries, like the fundamental lesson from countries that have come out of authoritarian threats, is that you have to build a mass movement of opposition. You have to build to 60%. It's not it the countries become too brittle when it's 51-49,
Mm-hmm.
51-49. And candidly, in 2020, it was like 51-49. The President Biden won a big electoral victory. I mean, a big popular victory and a pretty big electoral victory. But the numbers in some places were pretty small. And so, if we want to defeat Trumpism and MAGA, I think we have to really think of a politics that binds 60% of the country. We have to mobilize to demonstrate opposition to the government, and on many days what I would call actually a regime. But the way to fundamentally, I think, break the fever of this, to restore like a democracy, is not to be 51-51 or 50-50. It is to try to build a broad coalition of opposition. And I think the demonstration of Mamdani is that plenty of moderates want to vote for actual answers on cost of living. But I also think I think we should learn really important lessons from him, and definitely lessons on communication and on issues. But I also think, the truth is that the Democratic Party has become so brittle that it can't even compete in states or it hasn't been able to compete in states like Iowa and Ohio, where it has to be able to win a Senate majority in the future. And so we have to do both of these things. Like, It's a big country, and I believe in a very big tent. And so I think we should learn the lessons of Mamdani. But I also think, like, maybe that won't play so well in Iowa, and we have to give people spaces to actually put forward an agenda that can reach to the middle to win in places like that. Because that is a problem for both of us. Like, we need to inspire the next generation, and we need to be able to attract a broad coalition in states that we haven't done, and we have to do, like the Texas redistricting. Like, it's because Democrats aren't competitive in Texas that they are allowed to, that they feel like they could do this. And if we actually got to a much tighter race, into like, if we were in 2019 right now, where Better Work had just came within 2 points, they'd be too scared to do this. So that's why it does actually matter to build those broad coalitions as well.
And so with regard to what's happening in Texas, it's interesting what people like Gavin Newsom, governor of California, have been starting to say. Do you believe that Democratic states are going to start to mirror what Texas is trying to do, if they go ahead and do it, as the only answer to this kind of shenanigans?
Yeah, I mean, we actually had Better Work at the Center for American Progress just the other day, and he came to speak about what's happening in Texas. And
I heard him speak on that.
What the response should be. And, I think he's absolutely right. I think the real problem in an authoritarian, when you are facing an authoritarian threat, the real problem is the shamelessness of the regime, the administration, to use power to maintain power. And the threat is so real that we unfortunately have to fight fire with fire. And some of us, a decade ago, as only blue states were using commissions, warned that this is an asymmetry we're creating, because Republican states will do things like gerrymander and do a redistrict in the middle of a decade, and a state like California will do a process where it's like fair. Now, this is actually why we need national legislation, why we need democracy reform, because you actually need a system that levels the playing field. And that was in the reforms, Democrats tried to pass a couple of years ago. We have to be more ruthless about passing those reforms. But I think fundamentally, it is not just like whether Democrats have enough spine. It is, you have to answer what you did in this moment when your grandkids ask you.
Yep.
Democrats say, we were too concerned about niceties, so that we allowed basically Trump to change the rules so that he could just maintain a House of Representatives no matter what happens. Then shame on us for not doing what we could to protect the country when we had the chance.
So true. And people often say that, Democrats, they bring a knife to a gunfight. I don't even think they bring a knife. I think they bring a moral center to a gunfight.
Yes.
We know how far that goes.
And here's my take. Let's like save the country and like let's get back to normal politics, and let's then live in normal politics, sure. But like we weren't in normal politics during the Biden administration. I think this is one of the things, like, we thought President Biden thought, we're going to restore normal politics.
Right.
And that's not what the Republican Party was doing. They were not restoring normal politics. It was like a one-sided, let's be normal politicians again. And I think we have to like break the fever by taking like aggressive action to protect the country. And then when this fever is broken, we can go back to it, but not 1 minute before.
I couldn't agree more. Neera, this was a great conversation. Please do come back and talk to us again.
I loved it. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.